Well, it's that time of the year again. The time when the silly sods from Chatham have released yet another quote-unquote new iteration of Train Sim World. At this point, I'm so sick of Dovetail Games' practice of annual releases that I decided not to bother getting the full TSW6 package, be it the standard or deluxe edition. Instead, I just got the free starter pack along with the Riviera Line and Class 220 Voyager as standalone add-ons. If I ever pick up the Morristown Line and Leipzig to Dresden, that won't be until I can get them for a substantial discount. If you get the Riviera Line and Class 220 Voyager as standalone add-ons, they are priced at $57 and $25 respectively. Those prices are in my local currency of New Zealand dollars. Unless there is something from another country that I find particularly interesting, like the upcoming Czech, Portuguese and Japanese routes, I intended to focus primarily on British add-ons for future TSW reviews, simply because I'm more familiar with the UK's railways than any other country that's currently in the game, especially now that I've been to England and Wales in real life. Of course, I would have jumped straight onto a New Zealand route if, by some miracle, we ever get one in TSW. An acceptable starting point in my country would be a suburban line in Auckland, preferably the scenic Eastern Line from Britomart to Manukau, complete with the AM electric multiple units for passenger services, and a Kiwi Rail's DH diesel locomotive for freight services. TSW6's new core features are platform and on-train announcements, ambient audio for the passengers, random train faults, and random events, such as signals taking longer to clear, or the occasional temporary speed restriction. The new announcements sound very similar to what I remember hearing on the stations in real life, although one thing I don't like is Dovetail's use of AI voices instead of recordings of real people. Come to think of it, I wish DTG had got Jeff Marshall, or hell, even Francis Bourgeois, to voice these announcements.
The next train to arrive at platform 4 will be the 11:25 Great Western Railway service to Penzance. The next train to arrive at platform 3 will be the 11:29 Great Western Railway service to Paignton.
I'm not saying that the new features aren't interesting in concept, quite the opposite, but they're simply not enough to justify a new iteration of TSW, and should have been added as core updates to TSW 5. At this point, I have very little faith in Dovetail Games' ability to do anything other than a half-assed job when it comes to introducing major core updates for TSW, so I disabled random signal delays, temporary speed restrictions, and train faults on my end. The more often these developers churn out half-baked DLC or updates, the harder it gets for one to be excited about upcoming major releases. The base Riviera Line package only includes the Class 802 Hitachi IET and Class 150/2 Sprinter in GWR colours, with the 802 being a new addition to the game, and part of the same family as the Class 801, which you can get with ECML Peterborough to Doncaster. While the 802s and 150s do run on the Riviera Line in real life, the Class 158 Sprinter does so as well, so her absence on the TSW route is disappointing. Here's hoping that Skyhook Games can make a GWR variant of the 158 at some point, and for a reasonable price. I don't want a repeat of the $25 rip-off that was the ScotRail 158. Also, in before Exeter St Thomas the tank engine. Dovetail also modelled the Class 220 Voyager for TSW, but as I alluded to earlier, she is sold separately, because of course she is. Not helping the situation is the omission of the Class 221 Super Voyager, which, in real life, is used on services through Devon just as often as the 220, and I've even seen the two classes working together on multiple occasions. Come to think of it, if Just Trains could include a 221 in their old Voyager pack for TS Classic, there's no excuse for Dovetail to not bother doing the same for TSW. All they would need to do to accurately recreate the 221 is add a fifth coach and alter the cab and bogies. There would be no need to add a tilting function, as it was disabled on Cross Country's 221s in 2008. Unless Dovetail somehow think that people would still be upset if the 221 had no tilting in the game. Another omission from TSW6 was the rainbow livery worn by Unit 220005. Knowing Dovetail's affinity for easy cash grabs, I wouldn't be surprised if they're saving this livery for a future gameplay pack. According to a pre-release article published by Dovetail, the Class 220 will eventually have a layer on the Cross City line, more specifically in the updated Class 170 timetable. She will also appear on All Aboard Studios' yet-to-be-released West Coast Main Line Birmingham to Crewe route. Unfortunately, it looks like the Cross City line and Birmingham to Crewe will be the only routes, out of all that are suitable for the 220, onto which this unit will actually layer in timetable mode. One of many scenic highlights on the Riviera Line is this amusement park at Dawlish Warren, and I remember seeing this park when I went to the station on the 27th of April. However, the really feckin' big Ferris wheel was nowhere to be seen, and, come to think of it, if Andrew from the Australian band In Excess was here, that would be a Ferris wheel. Much to my disappointment, neither the Dartmouth Steam Railway nor South Devon Railway are included in TSW6's Riviera Line add-on. I find the South Devon's omission especially annoying since A. It's not a particularly long line at only 6.64 miles, B. It has some nice riverside scenery, C. The terrain's not too difficult, so I wouldn't have thought it would be too much extra effort to model for TSW, and D. I took the opportunity to ride on the SDR in real life on a day when Pannier Tank 1369 was doing the honours. If you've got the Peak Forest and West Somerset Railway route add-ons, you'll see the steam locomotives and WSR Mark I coaches representing the Kingswear services into and out of Paignton, despite the fact that the Jubilee, 8F and WSR Mark Is look completely out of place at this station. Meanwhile, the Class 33, or the Class 101 from WCML Preston to Carlisle, will appear on AI-only services at Totnes Riverside, as if this is any compensation for Dovetail's omission of the South Devon Railway. Although there is a Class 33 based on the SDR in real life, the TSW version only includes one livery, and as you saw, it is not this departmental two-tone grey worn by 33002 Sea King. On the topic of missed opportunities, DTG also omitted the Avocet line to Exmouth, the Dartmoor line to Oakhampton, and the Tarka line to Barnstaple. I haven't been to Exmouth or Barnstaple, but I did go to Oakhampton for a little bit on the 2nd of May, and saw a Class 166 while I was there. Come to think of it, DTG missed an opportunity to add a Great Western Railway steam locomotive, such as the Castle Class 460, in TSW. This could be used on mainline rail tour services, as well as the AI layers at Paignton. I know there aren't any castles based on that line, but she would still be a damn sight more appropriate for the region than the Jubilee and 8F. Timetable mode is based on the May 2023 schedule, and was put together by the same bloke who made the updated cross-city line timetable that comes with the Class 170 gameplay pack. There are 101 playable services for the Class 802, 123 services for the Class 150, and 64 services for the Class 220. Ordinarily, I don't bother with TSW scenarios due to my preference for timetable mode, but there's one scenario in the Riviera Line add-on that still caught my eye. It's called Day of the Dispatcher, as opposed to Day of the Diesels, and sees the player working as a platform dispatcher at Plymouth Station. To put it simply, a dispatcher is a member of platform staff who signals to the train crew when it's safe for them to depart, and they can also carry out other tasks, such as picking up rubbish, watering the flower beds, and, later in the scenario, you also get to lay down a ramp to allow an elderly man to safely board the train, but not without his feet phasing through the ramp. I wonder if this scenario is a test bed for a potential core feature in the somewhat inevitable TSW7, in the same way that a certain scenario on the Glossop line was a test bed for a full-on guard mode, which was eventually added in TSW5. It'll be interesting to see if what is essentially dispatcher mode gets developed any further, although I'm cautiously optimistic on this front, knowing what Dovetail are like. If you've got Skyhook's Midland Mainline add-on, then the East Midlands trains Class 158 will appear at Exeter St David's in lieu of the South Western Railway Class 159. I guess the developers didn't care about how out of place the EMT livery looks in Devon, but you at least have the option to disable this layer if you don't want to see the interloper. Come to think of it, I wouldn't mind seeing an Exeter St David's to Salisbury route in TSW at some point, complete with the Class 159, of course. Or better yet, have it set in the Network Southeast era and include the Class 50 Hoover with matching Mark 1 or Mark 2 coaches, as well as the 159. TSW is in dire need of more Network Southeast rolling stock than just the Class 483. Requirements for additional layers include, but are not limited to, the Class 166 from Great Western Express, the Railhead Treatment Train, Class 52 Western, and LNER A3 Flying Scotsman. It's good to see the 166 on the Riviera Line in-game, as these units can often be seen running on the route in real life. Meanwhile, the Class 52, Flying Scotsman, and other heritage locomotives are used to represent various rail tour services. One of them is supposed to be the Torbay Express, but it's made up of Mark I coaches from the West Somerset Railway, which do not run on the main line in real life. And it doesn't help that only two Mark I variants, namely the BSO and TSO, were included in the WSR add-on. Not helping the situation is a glitch where the Class 52's number plate starts with an A instead of a D. As for the Class 52 model herself, she is lacking the high-intensity headlight, GSMR radio equipment, and whatever else is necessary for present-day mainline running. In other words, this was a missed opportunity to add a modern mainline-certified variant of D1015 Western Champion. In saying that, I wouldn't be surprised if we only get D1015 as yet another overpriced gameplay pack. If you've got the WCML London to Milton Keynes, Class 20, and Southeastern high-speed add-ons, rolling stock from those packs will have layers on the Riviera Line to represent freight trains running to or from Exeter Riverside Yard, which is located just north of Exeter St David's station. According to a pre-release article, the bloke who put together the timetable has also planned nuclear flask trains from Plymouth Dockyard into the timetable ahead of the release of Skyhook Games' Cargo Line Volume 5. The nuclear flask layer will also require Rivet Games' Engineering Express and Just Trains' Class 86 and Mark II F pack. Incidentally, I have no intention of ever buying Engineering Express. Stock from Grump Dog Games' upcoming HST Farewell gameplay pack will also have layers on the Riviera Line. This is all well and good, but you won't be getting the modified Mark III coaches with sliding doors, so unless they're ever added to TSW, it will be impossible to accurately recreate the short-form HST castle sets in-game. Alongside a change of livery, the Class 150 also got new physics and, supposedly, improved sounds for her inclusion in the Riviera Line add-on. Apparently, the supposed improvements will be added to the Transport for Wales variants from Cardiff City Network, but not the Regional Railways variants from West Cornwall Local, for whatever reason. On a personal note, 150-233 is significant to me because I've ridden aboard this unit twice. The first trip was from Torquay to Dawlish, and the second was a round trip on the Lou Valley line down in Cornwall. Now that I've ridden aboard some of these units, not just 150-233, a few times, I'm reasonably familiar with how they sound in real life, and I can do a comparison between the real and in-game sounds. Personally, I think the Class 150's in-game horn sounds like it was synthesized instead of being recorded from the real thing. As for the prime mover, I don't know how to describe why, but it barely sounds like the real thing to me. I thought the brakes sounded reasonably accurate, although the screeching really hurts my ears. Indeed, that screeching is the only aspect of the real unit that I recall disliking.
Platform 1 for the 1157 Great Western Railway service to Paignton, calling at Newton Abbot, Torquay and Paignton.
And while I'm on the topic of comparing in-game sounds to the real trains, let's do the same for the Class 802 and Class 220. From what I've heard, DTG didn't do any dedicated sound recording on the real Voyager, because of course they didn't, and that left me with low expectations. Out of the Class 150, Class 220, and Class 802, I think the Class 220 is the most solid of the three, at least where the sounds are concerned. One thing I don't like about driving the Voyager is the throttle lever, which feels very heavy and sluggish as you move through the notches. As for the acceleration and braking physics, these are neither too sluggish nor ludicrously overpowered, in my opinion. And is it just me, or do the Class 220 and Class 802 not have any realistic exhaust effects? The 150, on the other hand, is a different story. As an aside, if Train Sim Germany could set up animated cows for the Mittenwaldbahn, why were we left with static cows on the Exeter to Plymouth and Paignton route? Unsurprisingly, some sounds on the Class 802 are recycled from the Class 801, such as the horn, door chime, and traction motor whine, but the motors are harder to hear over the roar of the MTU diesel engines. To be brutally honest, I'm not a fan of the default engine sounds on this train, which barely resemble what I remember of the real thing. It sounds as if every coach in the train has an engine, which is incorrect because, in real life, the 5-car units only have 3 engines, while the 9-car units have 5 engines. Come to think of it, Dovetail made a big song and dance about the random train faults, but the Class 802 has launched without those faults, and the developers say she'll get them in a post-release patch. Given how much they were trying to hype up Train Sim World 6, I think it's pretty stupid for Dovetail to release the game when multiple trains in the core package haven't yet received the random faults. As I said earlier, DTG have added ambient passenger audio as part of the TSW6 upgrade, but despite the amount of time I've spent exploring the Riviera Line, I've hardly heard any chatter from the NPCs, even though I've got internal passenger noise set to 100%. The NPCs are like the polar opposite of a song that's on full blast the whole time. Case in point, Do You Wanna Dance by Tony Basil, or, to use a more well-known example, You Spin Me Round, parentheses like a record, by Dead or Alive. As for the Class 802's interior, I think it looks pretty good in-game, although I don't like the harsh contrast between the bright green trim, grey seats, and off-white walls. That's not the fault of Dovetail, it's just how the train's interior looks in real life. Come to think of it, there are still no wheelchair-bound or even younger people in TSW. The NPCs that we do have are mostly, if not entirely, able-bodied middle-aged adults. I spent a decent amount of time train spotting in Dawlish on the 28th of April, followed by visits to Newton Abbot and Totnes on the 29th of April, then to Plymouth on the 1st of May, and what follows is a short montage of real footage along with recreations of said footage in TSW6. There's something at Dawlish Warren that I find annoying. Instead of simply letting players walk down to the street and under the railway to change platforms, Dovetail did this bizarre teleportation setup. I first saw this sort of thing on the Cardiff City Network route, and I've never been a fan of it. As far as I'm concerned, the water texture along the Dawlish sea wall looks perfectly fine, as are the textures for the big rock formations. However, the water texture doesn't look nearly as good around the Star Cross and Cockwood Harbour area. To my disappointment, there's an invisible wall preventing you from walking along the sea wall from the western end of Dawlish Station. Meanwhile, Torquay Station looks spot on, for the most part, and indeed, pretty much all the stations look pretty damn good, although I don't recall seeing many palm trees in between the tracks at Torquay. For comparison, here's one of my photographs of the real station. As for performance, it's okay on my end. It normally hovers between 55 and 75 frames per second, but I still get a bit of stuttering from time to time. For reference, I've got foliage quality set to high, shadow quality and effects quality set to medium, then sky, fog, post-process, view distance and texture quality on high, max FPS set to 130 and anti-aliasing at TAA. If I remember to do so, I'll also put my PC specs on screen. I also noticed this billboard at Teignmouth Station, and I brought it up because I recognise the name of that charity. At least I think it's meant to be a charity. I wonder if CALM is like Voices of Hope, a mental health group whose ads I've seen at numerous bus stops here in the city of Tauranga. Also, why does the in-game Riviera Line feature little cannons that fire confetti? The cannons may seem fun at first, but it doesn't take long for the novelty to wear off. I've had a few situations where I've been walking along the platform and hit a cannon without realising it was there in the first place. The sound of the cannon going off unexpectedly gave me one hell of a fright. I'm not impressed by this depiction of Totnes Riverside Station. The black platform sign, with the station name on it, is nowhere to be seen. There are too many trees around the head shunt at the end of the run-round loop. The signalman's hut by the points is completely missing, and the buildings on the platform are only semi-accurate at best. Meanwhile, there are numerous bugs with the NPCs that Dovetail still hasn't bothered fixing. I noticed multiple instances of people getting stuck in bunches at Exeter St David's, hovering or glitching through steps on the overbridge at the same station, one guy somehow standing on the stone wall at Exeter St Thomas, this woman that somehow got stuck in a loop at Marsh Barton, at least one instance where they all stood around like Muppets instead of getting on the train, and another woman stuck behind two blokes at Tor. How does she not realise that she can just walk around the other side of the bicycle? Sometimes, the NPCs will be invisible, for whatever reason, which results in a borderline eerie environment on the station. I'm in two minds regarding Train Sim World 6 and the TSW series as a whole. On the one hand, I am mighty pissed off at Dovetail Games for their business practices and the myriad of stupid decisions they've made over the years, not to mention all the half-baked DLC that gets released with several problems still unfixed. But on the other hand, it can still be fun to just boot up the game, load a random timetable mode service on a random route and to take a random train for a spin, although I usually do passenger services out of personal preference. If you like freight services, that's alright by me. As much as I want Dovetail to finally get their shit together and abandon the ridiculous practice of annual releases, part of me knows that there's little chance of that ever happening anytime soon, if ever. On the whole, and despite all the things I've criticised in this video, I think the Riviera Line add-on in Train Sim World 6 is reasonably good, but obviously not without its issues. The omission of the Class 221 Super Voyager and absence of the Falklands War Memorial at Plymouth still annoy me, as does the omission of the branches to Barnstaple, Oakhampton, Exmouth, Kingswear and Buckfastleigh. As for things that should be improved, these include, but are not limited to, removing the unnecessary invisible wall at the western end of Dawlish Station, sorting out the sounds on the Class 150 and Class 802, as well as the water texture around Starcross and Cockwood Harbour, and, of course, the dodgy NPCs. Although the NPC bugs are not isolated to the Riviera Line. As for the good things, these include the overall scenery quality, busy timetable, and immersive announcements, not to mention the route coverage still being decently long, even without the branches to Barnstaple, Oakhampton, Exmouth, Kingswear and Buckfastleigh. I would recommend this route to other TSW players, but not at full price. As for where I'd rate the Riviera Line, I think it deserves a 7 out of 10. And for anyone who has stuck around to the end of the video, you win a cardboard container from South Africa that plays rugby, but only in the season immediately following winter. It's the Spring Box.